Welcome, everybody. Hello. Thanks for joining me today. So I sent you a workbook. If you've got that, have it beside you. I won't be going word for word through that, but that's something that you can then think about and relate for yourself, or grab a notebook. And yes, as I mentioned, we're going to have some Q&A at the end. So quick introduction. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more later, but my name's Gemma Gladstone. And what I'm focusing on now in this point of my life, even though it's been a very long interest of mine, is to help women pretty much break for good, if we can, unhelpful repeating relationship patterns. And there's a number of things we have to do in order to do this. And one of the main things we have to do is to rewrite what I call our love template. And I'm going to be explaining to you what we have to do in order to do that. So look, my focus is that I want to help women with a few things. One is to recognize unhealthy dynamics really early after you've met someone, in the early phase of a relationship, including harmful dynamics. And also just recognize when the relationship isn't good for you, it's not meeting your emotional needs, and it's not in your best interest, helping you develop the tools and the insights to be able to have that awareness really early on. I'm a big believer in early intervention and early prevention across the board for everything, but especially in the area of relationships. So I'm focusing now in my life, like I said, I've had a long interest in this, in educating and supporting women to learn about themselves deeply. So it's all about us. This is not about making yourself better or how to catch the perfect partner, if only, right? But it's about understanding ourselves deeply so that we can be equipped to make really good decisions, and healthy ones at that. So we can save ourselves time, precious time, so that you can pursue what you want in life, whether that be partnership, family, whatever ambition you have in life, that you save yourself time and not get caught up in relationships that don't serve you. And secondly, so that we can avoid negative outcomes. So that's my focus, and that's my work, and that's what I like to help women with. And this is what I pretty much do in my professional life. I'm guessing you're here because you've identified with this training. So perhaps you've got a history of relationships with maybe unavailable guys. Maybe you've seen this pattern, you've identified it, but you feel stuck. Maybe you're at that phase of your life where you were looking for a partner, to have a life partner, to have a secure relationship with, to have a family with, but you're getting incredibly frustrated and despondent about that because that's what you want to do. Or you might be thinking about dating again, but you may be petrified to get back out there because you've perhaps come out of a 20-year marriage with someone who's been narcissistic, and you, even though it wasn't your fault, don't want to repeat that pattern again. So you might be in a place where you're struggling to trust yourself, may even have internalized it, might feel helpless, might even have started to think, what is wrong with me? And of course, there's nothing wrong with you. And this is not about blame. This is all about insight and empowerment. And that's what my teachings are about: insight, action, and empowerment. When you think about your patterns, if you look back and go, yeah, I've been in those sort of relationships, it's really affected my life. I want to address quickly just some things that might have gotten in the way of maybe having a good long-term relationship that's secure and healthy. Of course, there's 100 things that might have gotten in the way, but these are really some common, it's a bit like myths, really, some common things that you might have been told. We grew up believing that you've been told you've got to trust chemistry, that in order to have a good relationship, there has to be that instant spark. It's all about the fairy tales. We learnt that growing up, watching Disney. It's like, it's got to be love at first sight. Okay, now this is a myth and it's problematic. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in a minute, but it's interesting to know that, and you might notice when you look back, sometimes it's the people that we've had the highest chemistry with, the highest kind of like intensity, that have actually had the propensity to wound us the most emotionally. In other words, maybe it's the people we've had the highest chemistry with at the beginning who have ended up to be the least best match for us. That happens, and there's a science behind that. That's one of the areas I'm really interested in. So you may have also been told to just give it more time or focus on their potential. So you might be in a relation, you might have been in a relationship, or you might have met someone and it's not turning out and you're thinking, oh no, this doesn't feel good. But then maybe friends or family who have met well have said, oh, just give it time. Or what kind of person can he become? You've got to look at the positives, right? You've got to look at the positives. But actually, we don't have to look at the positives. We have to do that in life. But when we're looking at partner selection, we have to look at the person who's right in front of us and know that they're not our project, and we don't want to choose based on their potential. So that's a really important one as well. Maybe you've been trying to think your way out of this pattern rationally. Maybe you've done a lot of work on yourself and there's still some kind of missing pieces. So sometimes we can see our pattern, but we feel stuck. And then we think about it and then we end up blaming ourselves. We don't end up getting to the root cause of what's actually going on because we're stuck in our head about all the woulda, coulda, shouldas. If only I'd done this differently, or maybe I sabotaged that by really doing this, or whatever it might be. And so we want to move the focus around ruminating, and because that often leads to just self-blame and doesn't help us. This is a really good one. So maybe you've been told that it's just a numbers game. Dating, just get out there. Now, while that's true, that we do have to get out there if you're looking for some partner, but dating is not just a numbers game. It doesn't matter how many hundreds of people you date if we are inadvertently doing it a way that is not in our best interests. If we're focusing on them and their needs and what they want, maybe we're focusing on who do I have to be on this date? Who do I have to become? Do I have to become a needless person or whatever? So if we're focusing on the wrong things, then dating is not just a numbers game. We want to be dating differently from a mindful and really intentional place, not just let's just go through the numbers. And of course, internet app dating on the apps, I think it's good, but it can also open up to this mentality of I just have to keep swiping right and everything will be okay. Also, maybe you think that you need to change yourself to make it work, right? I have to be better. I have to be someone else. Or maybe you've even thought you have to be more desirable. You have to be more whatever. So you think you have to change yourself. Before I move on to that, tell me if any of that relates to you. Which ones do you relate to, or maybe something else? Just pop it in the chat so we can have a look. Do any of those ring true for you? If so, which ones? Yeah, okay, E. Oh, there's a lot of E's. Yep, E's and E's, yeah. You think you need to change yourself to make it work. Over focusing on the other. The need to change. Yes. Yep. A bit of everything. Yeah, feeling helpless, internalizing the blame. A lot of things do come into that. You think you need to change yourself in some way. And of course, unfortunately, sometimes we end up with partners and we don't leave because we're not maybe trusting ourselves. And then by staying, this really gets reinforced, right? We start to really learn, oh gosh, maybe it is me. Now, of course, this is not about not taking our personal responsibility. It's all about responsibility, but it's not in a blaming way. It takes two to tango, we know that. But it's about self-understanding. But some of these things are myths that keep us stuck and haven't really helped us. So what I want you to know is that if you've had this pattern where you have been with men, partners who have not been there for you, it's happened more than once. Maybe you've always ended up with narcissists, self-absorbed guys, or guys that needed to be fixed, or people who weren't pulling their weight, or people that were very avoidant. That it's not your fault, and it doesn't help to think about it in those terms at all. And there are actually missing pieces. It's not really, I don't mean to sound, that's not like the secret, but there are missing pieces. There are factors that are actually hidden from view, from our conscious view at least, that play a role. And there is another way to begin to break patterns, right, to solve these issues. Guys with addiction, yes. Yep. Not very emotionally difficult. Guys with addiction, anybody who's got an addiction, they're not bad people, but it can be very difficult to have a relationship with them, a successful one. So what keeps people, women, stuck in these kind of cycles? I'm going to build on this, but the thing is about everybody, all of us, nobody, I want you to know this because some people think that they're addicted to pain or addicted to bad relationships. We don't seek out bad relationships. Nobody does that. We are consciously wanting healthy connections. We are consciously wanting that. You've noticed, and you may have noticed in yourself, that, say, for example, you're looking for a partner. Anybody can meet a partner with maybe toxic traits like narcissism, or maybe anybody could meet a partner that's got a lot of addictions, or anybody could meet a partner who's very emotionally withholding and very avoidant and very depriving. We can all meet people like that, but not everybody stays. Not everyone stays. And this is a really important piece of the puzzle. And we stay not because of our fault, but because of things that are underneath the surface. And this is what we need to illuminate if we're going to break our patterns. So you'll find that in past relationships, maybe you've been in one that hasn't been good, part of you might have knew it wasn't good for you, but then another part of you might have said, hang on a minute, maybe I'm overreacting, or maybe it's me, or maybe things will get better, or whatever the maybes were. And you've talked yourself out of it. You haven't trusted your gut. And early days, we do this a lot in relationships. Obviously, the longer we're in a relationship that's not great, the more complicated it gets. So leaving a really long-term relationship is very hard, and there's many factors involved. My message is let's empower ourselves early to make really informed decisions early on. And if you're getting back in there, let's think about what can I modify inside myself in a good way in order to protect myself going forward. Yes, so a few of you have been in long-term relationships. All right. We often have a struggle when we're in a relationship. We say, or when we're starting out meeting someone, they've only had even a few dates, we might have got a sense that, oh, that doesn't feel good, or that doesn't feel right, or I feel really alone, or whatever it might be. And then there might be good reason for that in relation to the other partner, but we've stayed because it's been very difficult to put ourselves first and leave. Okay, so this is another way of just saying what I've just said. I call it the predicament, or the love paradox is another word I use for it. Most of us, if we're interested in relationships at all of us, perhaps desire a long-term relationship with an emotionally available partner. I don't think there'd be anybody here in the chat who's going, I don't want an emotionally available partner. So if you want a partner, that's what you normally want. So we have this want, we have this desire, and we have this need. But our unconscious patterns, unfortunately, can lead us to partners who are not right for us, right? So here we are wanting something, and then we've got something out of our conscious awareness leading us towards other things, which is not fair. So when we've got that predicament, it's really difficult to make really good dating and relationship decisions because we're not aware of what's keeping us stuck. Now, I say that we are following an old love map that we didn't even know we had. Now, this love map is very old and it's built on lots of things, implicit things, perhaps some things we don't even remember, and many things we learnt when we were very young and as a child and a teen. And in a nutshell, what we have to do if we want to think about breaking our recurring intimate relationship patterns, we want to be able to really identify what this old map is and it's all its threads. And we want to consciously, with our new knowledge, write ourselves a new one, write ourselves a new love template. Yes, thank you for all those messages in the chat. They're great. I'm going to keep all those. Yeah, they're all really important themes and they're so common. So many people have experienced things like that. Okay, so just a bit more about my background. So I was a psychologist for 28 years. And in that time, I had various few different roles. But for many years, I worked as a therapist in the therapy room. And among other things, because I had a few different interests, trauma and all sorts of different things, specializing in adults and relationships and mental health, I did notice lots of patterns emerging in my female clients, sometimes men, but as we know, men have taken a long time to catch up to going and initiating therapy. That's changed now. But when I started out, there was a lot more women. So I started to see these patterns emerging, which were actually similar to some of my own patterns. That was the history of this meeting these unavailable partners, where I didn't know where I actually stood. They might have been a bit longer term or often short term, but just not knowing where I stood, feeling quite anxious in the relationship and feeling insecure, like I was on insecure ground. I often, maybe this was because went into psychology, I often found myself in relationships with people who needed me and I was a bit of a carer, right? And so I was noticing these patterns in my clients. Sometimes I would hear stories of really bad outcomes, and we've all heard those on the news. Bad outcomes that when I interviewed women, they'd say, gee, I felt it, I saw it. You know, I even saw it on our honeymoon, or I even felt it in the first months of dating. Now, the problem is that they didn't see it, feel it. The problem is that things got in the way of them acting on it and putting themselves first. And that's a really interesting part. What did I see? I saw a lot of women reporting recurring relationships with people they described as narcissistic, control. A lot of these women, very smart, self-aware, reflective people, often very nice people, often tended to be real people pleasers and difficulty putting their needs first. Then some women, particularly younger women, but not always, they'd report these horrible situationships are horrible things, and we're not cut out for that. It's a bit soul destroying. So in being involved with these non-committal partners or casual sex not leading into a relationship, young women in particular saying, oh, if I don't sleep with this person, then they're not going to want me around. They're going to lose interest in me. I have to do that, or I have to be okay with that whole casual sex culture, which is just a furphy, because we're not actually wired that way, particularly if we have some of these schemas that I'm going to talk about later. But I think just as human beings who are wired for attachment, we're actually not wired for casual sex. I'm not being a wowser. That's not to say that mightn't be good sometimes. I'm just saying that that's a pattern. If you don't want that, it's not a great pattern to be in. So some of these women are always wanting more, waiting for something to happen or waiting to hear more in the relationship and hoping for change. So they tended to stay despite early signs of incompatibility. And then what normally happens then is we internalize, feel confused, despondent, nothing will change. These patterns are unchangeable, or really maybe the dreaded one, maybe I'm just not, maybe there's nobody for me. Or maybe I'm not, maybe I'm like flawed, that I'm unlovable. That's sometimes at the core of it. So when I was practicing, I did a lot of different modalities, learn about a lot of different things, as you do when you're a therapist and you're interested in helping people make real change. Must say, I'm no longer a registered psychologist anymore. I moved out of that space a couple of years ago. And now all my professional focus is on this issue. So I work more within a coaching frame and both individually and in a group. I'm going to tell you about my Love Wisely group later on because I have had a couple of questions about it, and I do want to be able to let you know what I do, no pressure, how I work, and if you are in the right headspace and you want the thing I'm presenting, then I'd love you to join me, but more about that later. So I went into private practice when I was 31, 2001, and then discovered schema therapy, a model in schema therapy, which is a great therapy, but you can also use it in a coaching framework in many different ways. So I found that model was really good at both explaining what goes on for us internally and what happens interpersonally between people. And that it has a absolutely lovely framework for helping us understand why we do the things we do. It talks about these things called schemas, which are basically, say, like life scripts or deeply held core beliefs that govern almost everything we do. So great model. And I found that model really helped me turn things around for myself as well, because I intentionally started doing things differently. Yes. Thanks for the chat. I hope you can all see it. So obviously it's really common. I often will get people when I send anything out, or sometimes emails or surveys, I ask people to tell me what they're struggling with. And one woman wrote this, and this is really typical of a lot of the women I would see: a history of being involved with emotionally unavailable partners. She says, having recently started dating on the apps and finding it very triggering because she had feelings of abandonment and worthlessness even after a few dates. Have been in 2 dating situations for a few months with men who are very avoidant, and that's been really painful. Feeling a bit hopeless, I can't find a partner who is emotionally available, especially in my late 30s. So what I find is the women I mainly work with fall into 2 camps. One, it is women, it is comforting to hear that other people are going through the same thing, isn't it? It's always good to have a shared experience and makes us feel less alone. Just commenting on the chat there. So yeah, there's 2 camps. So basically I see women who are younger sometimes, but not so much in their 20s. But still, yes, I have definitely when I was a therapist more. But often it's either, obviously many women have the life goal of having a child, having a family with a partner. There's many different ways we can have a family, many different ways we can become a mother, and nothing is prescriptive, and particularly in this day and age. But the clients I often see are struggling with this idea of, I've got this pattern and I want to break it because I really want a partner and a family. And then I'll see other women who maybe, in their 50s, say, who have had a really long-term relationship or have a past pattern. Maybe they have kids, maybe they don't. Maybe their kids are in their late teens or 20s even, and they're saying, I don't want to do this again. I still would like a partner. I want someone to share my life with, but I want to make sure that I don't meet another narcissist. And that's a common thing I hear. Okay, yes, that's me. Some people are really identifying with that. Yes. From rocking the boat. Yeah, that's right. You said I'm an empath and it stopped me from rocking the boat and saying what I want and need. Okay, so here's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about tonight. What do we need to do to change our relationship patterns? And I suppose the knowledge that I'm bringing tonight is based on my career, my professional training, my personal experience, bringing things together that I know work and creating a framework for that. So I'm going to be walking you through what I think is important that we need to do to grasp, to change in order to say, let's start making a dent in this pattern because life's too short. I actually don't want to revisit that again. Okay, so here is, just put it out for you here. Now I call it the Love Wisely framework. The reason why I do that is I love that name. It sums up. Most of us want love. We don't need to have, obviously, a romantic or an intimate or a life partner relationship. It's totally optional. There's nothing wrong with wanting it or not wanting it. But if we do want one, and if we are looking, we want to make really wise and healthy decisions for us. So many women I have known over the years put themselves last. They're their last consideration, or they've learnt that they've had to shrink and tiptoe around. Maybe they grew up in a home where they weren't allowed to have an opinion, or where you had to just be a very kind of placating kind of person. You brought up in maybe with a dominant or critical parent or in a narcissistic home where you learnt to suppress yourself. A lot of my clients are in that category. So let's look at phase one. These are all the things that we want to be doing, right? When we want to change our relationship patterns. And the first thing we have to do is we have to know where we've been. Okay, so when I say we have to pattern insight, I mean we have to look at our relationship history and say, what's going on there with a whole new lens, a whole new framework for understanding where we've been. And this is where the schema framework comes in, and relationship psychology, a little bit of attachment theory, and a few other older way back theories, even in the back in the day with Freud and other people way back then. All of that stuff is super relevant, right? So we want to be looking at our relationship history, and there's ways that we can do that, but we need to look at it all and say, where have I been, in order to know where I want to go. The next thing we have to do is look at our schemas, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and our needs. So many women that I've worked with have said, what do you mean emotional needs? I'm not sure what you're talking about. Or, I've never thought about that. Do I have emotional needs? I've never thought about that. Yes, you do have emotional needs, and it's deeply important in terms of looking at intimate relationships. So we want to clarify that. We want to look at needs and schemas. We also want to look at how our schemas, these things, these life scripts, operate in our relationships, because some of these schemas are very much relational. They come out in our relational world and they influence what we do. And we want to look at how those schemas make us react, right? What they make us do, how they make us feel, and do they make us inhibit ourselves or wear a different mask, like a different persona. And in schema speak, we call this modes. Do we flip into a different mode? Maybe some of you even flipped into a different mode with when you meet a certain friend, or when there's somebody at work who is dominant, or when you even go out on a date. So our life scripts, our schemas, the way we cope with them influences these coping strategies that we adopt that are not usually helpful. And that's a really important piece of the puzzle. So with all this so far, we want to bring what we're maybe not aware of into conscious awareness. The next step is to really try to make all this stuff intentional. Okay, I've learned about my patterns. I've learned about my schemas, which is key, essential. I don't know how anybody doesn't. If you want to change a relationship pattern, it's very hard to do that unless you know about your relational schemas. I want to know about my needs. I want to know what am I doing? What am I bringing into the scenario? What part of myself maybe have I learnt? And maybe this is not actually helping me with connection. And then intentional. What can I do differently? Instead of going on dates worrying about, oh, I hope he likes me, or focused on the other person, right? Focus on the other person. What we want to do is bring you back into the center of things. We want to date experimentally. So I have a whole framework for how we date. I call it dating is data. So we want to do mindful dating and we want to experiment in real life. We want to opposite action and other things, other ways that we can experiment. And then finally, we want to look at how all this stuff from the past that we've learned, our schemas, our modeling, our upbringing, even our things we learn about, what do I have a type, all of this stuff, that's created an unconscious map that has potentially driven you towards the wrong people and got you stuck there. And now we want to consciously create a different one that's actually based on your needs and what you want in life. That's what we want to do. Okay, so now in the workbook I gave you, there's a bit of background about where I'm coming from in terms of, I talk about attraction in that booklet. And so when you read that, you can ask yourself, oh, what do I notice about? So I'm sure you've got some pattern recognition at the moment. You may feel stuck, but you probably recognized a pattern. But maybe you can examine one or two of the relationships that you've had and ask yourself, did I have super high chemistry with this person or not? And the guys that I've had really high chemistry with, what were they like emotionally? Or did those relationships crash and burn or what? So you can ask yourself some questions. So in our relationship review, we want to look at our past relationships through a new lens. We want to identify themes and patterns, identifying what comes out. When we don't do this, and I ask, oh, what's your past relationships? People say, oh no, they're all different. Oh no, none of them is the same. This one was that, this one was that. But what about how you felt in all of them? Was there any similarities there? Was there any similarities about how you felt in the relationship? What else can we gather from this data? Data is everything. And then what we do with the data is the next step. So by doing a really comprehensive relationship review, we can clarify where we've been. We can clarify, we can look at it not because we want to go, oh God, look what I've done, or relationship regret. No, we don't want to do that. Not helpful. We want to be really kind to ourselves, really compassionate to ourselves. If we are coming out of a difficult pattern or a long-term relationship that was horrible, it's not our fault. And it doesn't serve us to get into a rumination. Women are really good at ruminating, blaming, self-blame. Oh, I think we're partly programmed for that. So we don't want to do that. We want to have a clear, and I help women get a clear step-by-step framework for completing this review. It's what we do together. Sorry, there's a misprint there. Yeah, looking at where we've been in order to know where we're coming. Okay, I see schemas coming up in the chat. I know I lack boundaries because I don't want to be yelled at. Well, no, it's awful. No one wants to be yelled at. We shouldn't be yelled at. But sometimes some of our schemas, like maybe the subjugation schema, in that case, inhibits us from really expressing ourselves. Okay, so phase 2 is schemas. What are they? And what are our emotional needs? I put these two things together because schemas develop in childhood when we haven't had enough of our emotional needs met. There's no time to go into emotional needs tonight. But I want to help you look at some schemas. Yep, I feel the need to be approved of and accepted by them. Whether that is a schema, right? So what are your schemas and your relational schemas? We want to look at those, how they influence your relationships and your partner choice. And we want to understand this crazy thing called schema chemistry. And that is when we meet somebody and we have big attraction to them, big sexual chemistry, big romantic chemistry with the very people who have the propensity to trigger us the most, right? And there's a long psychology involved in that. I'm not going to have time tonight to unpick that in detail. I'm just going to cover it and let you know what it is. Okay, so if you haven't heard of schemas, they are called early maladaptive schemas, and they're pretty much like having a life script, a deeply held core belief that you're not always aware of, but they're back there and they drive your decisions. They even drive romantic stuff, right? Even influence who we find attractive to some degree. They stop us leaving relationships early when we know that's not good for us. They actually influence so much. Now we've got a whole bunch of them, and these are one of the main, what I call relational schemas. Very common ones that you can probably relate to would be abandonment. Abandonment is a schema that underpins a lot of things. Most people that walk around with a very, say, with an anxious attachment style, you've probably all heard of attachment styles. At the core of that is an abandonment schema. Sometimes even an avoidant attachment style at the core of that could be the same schema, but we just have learned to cope in very different ways. So these primary schemas like emotional deprivation, which is not expecting that there'll ever be someone to meet your needs, abandonment, fearing that loss all the time, expecting instability in relationships, being preoccupied with that, having that will wound. These things are all wounds if we think about it like that. Defectiveness really is a belief at the core where we're lacking, we're no good, there's something wrong with us. And there's many others. I want to draw your attention to over on this side, we've got these things called secondary schemas, subjugation, self-sacrifice, approval seeking. And these are things that we develop in order to cope, right? So we've learnt subjugation means to shut down because we've got a stronger other in the household. So we might have learnt to inhibit ourselves, and then fast forward, we might do that in our adult life. So this is just a very brief overview of these things called schemas, but they're really important. They play out in themes in our life, and how we respond to our schema is really important. And that's the beauty of the schema model, because it says not only do you have these schemas, but when they're triggered, how we respond to them is really important to know. There's different types of responses, and how we respond, we can change. We can also do healing at the level of the schema, but we can also modify how we respond, because our responses and our coping modes and the masks we wear, they're really important to know about. For example, you might have an abandonment and a self-sacrifice schema. So you've learned that you've got this core abandonment wound, and then you've learned, okay, I take care of others. I grew up in a household where I had to suppress my needs and worry about the other person. And so that leaves a template in you that says, in order to keep connection, with someone, I've got to put myself last. I've got to focus on the other person. Maybe you've got a subjugation schema, and you think in order to connect with somebody, in order to be okay, I've got to inhibit myself. I've got to suppress my voice. I've got to block my needs. I'm not going to share myself, right? And so there's all these different schemas, and they're really important. And once we understand them, we can get a lot of clarity. So why are they important? Schemas can affect how we respond to external evidence. So if we're in a relationship and we've actually got a partner who's started doing things that are actually real, like they are depriving, they're not respectful, maybe they're being very critical. So there's problematic things. Our schemas will affect how we respond to that. And the problem is some of these schemas around people pleasing will tell us that, okay, I've got to be quiet, I've got to accept that kind of thing. They can very much influence whether we have boundaries or not. Yes, very much influence what we think we can ask for in a relationship, deserve in a relationship. They influence our ability to have boundaries. So schemas influence also the decisions and actions that keep us in unhealthy relationships too long. We might be prone to blame ourselves, like the defectiveness schema. We might say, oh, it's obviously because of me, not because of the other person. And while it takes two to tango, where sometimes our schemas will keep us stuck in relationships where there are clear signs that it's not okay. Now, schemas take a bit to shift. They're pretty robust because some of them develop super early. For example, abandonment can develop even pre-verbally. So this is when we have experiences of being attached and then being separated, either through permanent separation or just through inconsistent separation or that kind of thing. I'm not going to go too deep into where our schemas come from, but suffice to say, our childhood, right, and our temperament mixed together to create our schemas. I lose my identity and stop living my own life is a very common one that I hear as well. So schemas are self-confirming. They have a strong confirmation bias. This means that we can get self-fulfilling prophecies. So say I'm in a relationship with someone and I already knew they were a bit emotionally unavailable, or maybe they weren't available. Maybe they just separated and they have 3 kids and they're not really physically available very much because they're all over the place. But I started off anyway, even though I know that's not where I am, that's not what I want. Or maybe I see early signs in a relationship of someone who's not reliable. Maybe they've cheated. Maybe they're just really avoidant or really inconsistent. They cancel on me. They're all over the place. And I have an abandonment schema, but I say, look, I'm going to hold on because maybe it'll get better, right? Because I'm attached now, so maybe it'll get better. But then it doesn't get better and I've stayed too long. And then I can end up telling myself, see, all my partners are like that. But what's actually happened is the schema has kept you in there. And so schemas can produce these things called self-fulfilling prophecies. And what we do when we have a schema, we're very good at finding evidence to support the schema. We're not very good at finding evidence to dispute the schema. So they're tricky things, hence why we have to know about them. I mentioned schema chemistry before. This is a lovely thing in the schema model. And it really refers to the feeling we have with somebody that's intense, fireworks, with another person who has the potential to wound us emotionally in the same way as we were wounded as children. So if we have a very big emotional deprivation schema and we feel like no one will ever be there for us deep down, then we might start off in a thing with an emotionally distant person. It's like the distant, not they don't open up, they're in their cave. And we struggle with that. But the more we get to know them, we move toward them even more. And we might have big chemistry with that person. Or we might have big chemistry if we were criticised a lot and we've got a defectiveness schema. We might have big chemistry with someone who's narcissistic. So schema chemistry it's not there always, but it's there often. And if you meet someone and say, oh, where have you been all my life? You're more than 10 out of 10. I'm thinking about you all the time. Can't get you off my mind. There's probably this going on. And schema therapy is based on implicit recognition, which is a whole theory but you don't need to know that now. But that's basically just to say that that it is a real phenomenon and there's no coincidence. We often feel if we have schemas around abandonment, defectiveness or emotional deprivation, we might feel left to our own devices, we may just radiate towards people who have this potential to really activate us. hence getting involved with emotionally unavailable people. So tell me in the chat, has anybody noticed that pattern where you've had high chemistry with people who have been the least emotionally available or not? Yes. Yeah, most of the time it's there. Yeah, most of the time. Okay. So it's a thing, right? And my question is, what are we activating in them? Is it simply narcissistic? It depends on who they are and what their schemas are. But usually there's a complementary but negative kind of system going on. So schema chemistry. So in short, we do have the tendency as human beings to be more romantically attracted to people who will trigger us and reinforce our vulnerabilities, our schemas. This whole phenomenon operates out of conscious awareness. Often the stronger the chemistry, the greater the potential for what's called replication. You know how people say, oh, you're staying in this relationship because it's familiar. What on earth does that mean? There's a truth to that, and it's called implicit recognition. And this is when the dynamic that we are feeling is very similar to an early dynamic that we felt. So what's familiar? What's the early dynamic? It's the presence of the unmet need, or what's called the need frustration. And when we're little, when we're growing up, when we're babies, when we're kids or kids, we tend to think that if we don't get a need met, it's because of us. We naturally will assume that as humans until we learn otherwise. So we tend to blame ourselves, and we do become more fixated on what we didn't get, not in a weird way or not in an attention-seeking way. So that when we feel that same thing fast forward in adult relationships, a part of us, a very young part of us who learnt that initially, I'll call that like the inner child or the vulnerable child mode, the abandoned child, that part of us goes, oh, this feels similar. I know what I have to do. I have to try harder. I have to hang around longer. I have to give everything I've got. I have to get this person to see me and love me, right? Because the love of an unavailable partner is going to make me feel good about myself, is going to mean I'm okay, is going to mean I'm worthy. So that's one of the takes on this aspect of kind of schema chemistry. Yes, it is similar to seeking our parent in our partner, but in relation to the aspect of the parent that was most frustrating, the unmet need, the unmet need. And there's no clear relationship between mother, father, whoever. It can be both parents, it can be one parent, it can be parent-like figures. But we are focusing more on what is familiar is the need frustration. So a schema chemistry explains that initial attraction. So these relationships are often, they feel powerful. They don't feel powerful because they're good, but because they're activating something unfinished. So what happens is what begins as familiarity, then we get involved, we become attached, because as soon as we become intimate with somebody, our attachment network is blown wide open. We start feeling all those hormones. And then over time it becomes really hard to walk away from this because there's so much invested. And so we become very invested. So basically this is what happens. There's a lot of questions coming in the chat, and I'm gonna talk to that one, Kay, about the healing versus wounding us. But essentially this is an explanation as to why some of these relationships feel so compelling. There's that, but then there's also the ongoing role of schemas. Like, for example, if we're more subjugated or if we have that people-pleasing set of schemas, then it's going to be really hard to put ourselves first. It's going to be hard to trust ourselves. It's going to be hard to act in our best interests. and all of those sorts of things. We might have a story that we tell ourselves, oh, my partner needs me. I've got to take care of them. So this is a detour, and then I'm going to get back on the roadmap. So in schema-driven relationships, each partner is unconsciously behaving in a way that keeps the other person's schema intact. So if I'm being criticized constantly, then there's nothing else to tell me that I'm okay. All right, I'm being criticized because I'm not any good, or my partner's depriving me because I'm not lovable, and so forth. And in many cases, we're co-creating some aspect of the very dynamic that hurt us. This is not always conscious. This is not always black and white, but it's often always there in some degree, but sometimes hard to identify at first. Okay, let's come back. So that was my detour from schemas. Let's look at something else about schemas, which is how we cope with our schemas. Now, how our schemas affect, we got there. Just to say, there's different ways that our schemas affect us, right? And they affect how we cope, because we develop these coping personas. So what are we coping with? We're coping with the pain of the schema. So if I've got a defectiveness schema and part of me believes that I'm inferior and that I'm no good and that I'm not important, then I might have developed a way of coping with that. Different ways. I could develop a number of different ways. Maybe one of the ways I've coped with it is to become very superior, is to become arrogant, is to become entitled. Now, this is what we call a coping mode of narcissism, right? We actually feel not good about ourselves, but we're disowning that and we're pushing that onto other people. Now, that's a form of coping, not a healthy coping way, right? Another form of coping would be to believe the schema. So if you really believe that in the end you are going to be abandoned and that all your partners are going to prefer someone else, then it's easier to stay in a relationship with someone who perpetually abandons you if you already have that view. And so that would be an example of surrendering to the schema. So we want to cope in healthy ways. We want to learn how to cope in a healthy way. But sometimes, and some of you have noticed in the chat earlier on, we develop what we might call a false self. Now, a great example of a false self is the needless self. So I have so many clients over the years who have learned that, hang on a minute, it's not worth having a need. I've got to be small. I can't ask for too much. I don't want to make a fuss. I've got to tiptoe around. I had to tiptoe around on eggshells at home. It didn't pay to have needs. So fast forward, we do the same thing in our relational world. So we might have a mask that says, I don't need anything. It's okay. I'm really easygoing. Whatever you want to do is fine with me. All of that kind of stuff. Super common, very common in women. And it's something that we really need to identify early, because it plays a major role even on when we're dating somebody in the first couple of dates. So sometimes the way we cope, I've got the word sabotage, it's a bit of a harsh word, but it's true, unfortunately. We can fall into self-sabotaging loops. Our schemas cause that. And we do that because they're just so ingrained. And so it's about trying to understand that and break that pattern and do different things. Ultimately also doing some healing work, of course, around the core of the schema, right? That's important as well. And some of you may have already had therapy for some of these things. I don't know, I'm not going to ask you if you have, but it would be very common. You might have read a lot of books. You might have read attachment books. You might have seen therapists. And so you might have done some work in this area on yourself. Okay, so the next phase, so remember I'm going through all the things you have to do. So the next phase is action, pattern breaking, exercises, practice, experimenting in real life. So if you're a people pleaser and you find it excruciatingly painful to voice a preference, then I want you to go out in a safe way, I want you to go out and experiment with knowing that, hang on a minute, I have a preference and I don't want to be here, I want to be there. Or someone's just ordered me a second cocktail on this date. I'm not even drinking, but I drank the first one just to be a good date. But actually that's not even what I want or who I am. And so what am I going to do? Am I going to continue to surrender to the schema, or am I going to try to experiment with it and actually have a voice? Sometimes we have to do what's called opposite action. And with dating in more broadly, we have to take a very new approach to dating, a mindful and an intentional approach, which is what I mentioned before. So putting all of this stuff that we're learning in the real world into practice, examining ourselves, like that phrase, whatever, an unexamined life is a not very good life. I'm not saying that, but you know what I mean, an unexamined life. We need to do more than just examine our life, though. We need to practice it, right? We need to put these things into practice to see how difficult it is or whether it's okay, so that we can get new learning. This is how we change our neural networks. The number one thing to change our neural networks is there's two things change us at the brain level the most, and that is, one, practicing a lot of mindfulness, and two, practicing different behaviors. They're the two most important things for creating different new networks in our brain to reinforce new behaviors. That's not all about behaviors. Of course, we've got to do some healing, but intentional practice is super important. Okay, and then we want to put it all together in a way that says, okay, how have I been dating in the past? My schemas, my subjugation schema, my abandonment schema, my defectiveness schema have really played out in my relationships in these ways. And I've thought these things, I've believed these things about the schema. But what I want to do now is I want to realize that I've acted on schema chemistry, and I want to try a new approach. And I realize now that I've got these emotional needs, and there's 6 core ones that I talk about. Emotional needs, they're really important. So now I want a connection where I can be all of me. So obviously the end goal, whether we find a life partner or not, and we're much more likely to find one that's good for us if we do this sort of stuff. The end goal is becoming more authentic. That's one of the end goals. I don't mean that in a way that says, oh, just be yourself. Being more authentic because we want to cut away the coping modes or the inauthentic aspects of ourselves. So if I've been a people pleaser, I want to know, hang on a minute, has that served me? Did that help me? Did that get my needs met? Did I just attract narcissists? What's going on? And how can I start to unpick that? Because that's not me. That's not the real me. That's coping. That's surface level. That's a false sort of thing I've learned. I had to learn that to survive earlier. And then connection based on our needs. What do I want? What's actually important to me? If emotional availability is important to me, what does that look like in a partner? How do I recognize that in a partner? So just to recap, changing our relationship patterns is that we've got to get clear about our past in a different way. We have to learn a schema framework, because this takes the confusion out of it. And it helps us understand ourselves in a completely different way without blame. And it helps us understand what's maybe driven our past attraction to people. Then we have to identify how we have shifted and shape-shifted, what masks we've worn in order to cope with those schemas, so to cope with the core unmet need. we want to put all that together in a systemized way, just baby steps. We want to put this into practice in the real world if we can. And then at the same time, we want to be unconsciously developing and writing for ourselves a new love template, not one based on what your parents did. Again, not about blaming. Most of us and most parents do the best they could with what they knew. There's probably a few exceptions to that, because I've heard a lot of horror stories. But most of us do the best with what we can. We have good intentions. But we don't want our love map based on our model of our parents' relationship, or what we saw, or what we learn about ourselves, how we learned whether we were valuable or not, whether we deserve to have a voice, whether we could trust people or not. We don't want any of that affecting our future trajectory with our future choices in our relationships. So we need to bring all that into the light, really. And so when I say creating a new love template or map, what I mean is that we want to do this intentionally and start coming from a place of needs. What I want, how am I going to recognize emotional availability? What do I need to do? Got to be wary of these masks that I've been wearing. How can I be more authentic? And it's all really good stuff. It's not, oh my God, that sounds terribly draining. It's the opposite to draining. It's liberating and empowering. So when you combine all these aspects, I believe that you can actively break old patterns. And even though I talk about getting rid of masks, it's not actually about you being better, right? Not becoming a better person or anything like that, or changing who you are. It's actually coming back to the core, real you, right, underneath the stuff. Okay, so you know what? Someone's got a question. I don't work with couples anymore. I used to, and I don't work with couples anymore. And that's because I want to put all my energy into this stuff. So couples therapy and couple stuff, you can approach that also from a schema lens, right? But my focus is looking at helping women break patterns because they want something different, and helping them recognize what they want so that when they're experiencing something they don't, they're able to trust themselves enough to say, you know what, this is not for me. I'm going to opt out here because I know what I want and it's not that. And being able to know what stopped them in the past, and having the trust and the ability in themselves to choose wisely, basically. That's why my program's called Love Wisely. So when you think about attempting to break a pattern for yourself, sometimes people will have doubts about whether they can do that. And they can be quite down on themselves. And I've heard lots of different things from women, even women saying, I honestly do not believe there is anybody on this earth for me, or that anybody could love me. Now that's really sad. Obviously that comes out of a background of a lot of emotional deprivation and other things. But we have to know that's not the truth. It's not written in the clouds anywhere, the sky. That's not the truth. That is a learned, internalized belief that you carry around. So some of them are heavy like that, and some of them are not as heavy, such as this one. I've done so much inner work already. What's different about this type of pattern breaking? So what's different about this type of pattern breaking is that we are looking at schemas for a start. We can't just think ourselves out of patterns. We can't just date more. We have to put it under the microscope. So we have to put the schema lens. Totally different framework. A lot of aha moments. It helped me when I was dating. I was in my late 30s. And then I thought I kept attracting people who were poor things, and I had some unhealed abandonment, even though I've been working on that still. Sometimes it takes a long time to shift. I was a real people pleaser. I consider myself a recovering people pleaser. But I intentionally looked for something different, and I highlighted emotional availability. And I was fortunate enough to meet my husband when I was about 38. Perfect. No, but definitely different from the previous ones in a good way. Okay, what if nothing can really change for me? What if I'm not meant to have the kind of love I want? This again is coming from a schema, right? I believe that let's not limit ourselves yet before we've done the work to change patterns. So by all means, have a look at that notebook that I made for you and do some work in schemas. If you're interested to know what I do currently with my program, I'm going to be telling you a little bit about that because some of you asked for me, so I want to go through that and let you know how I can help. But know that this kind of thing is definitely coming from a schema. I already know my attachment style. It hasn't actually changed anything. So attachment styles are important, but they are not the whole story. Some people won't like this, but they're a bit of a blunt instrument, right? There's so much more underneath. Schemas lay underneath attachment styles. You can have an anxious and an avoidant person with exactly the same schemas and a few others, and the way they cope create their different attachment styles. So we need to go a little bit deeper than attachment styles. They're good, but they're not the whole story. So they do provide us with some info. Also, attachment styles vary. We can change our attachment style. We can have different attachment anxieties or avoidance come up when we have a different partner. So they're not fixed. So it's not helpful to go around saying, I'm an anxious or we have to look at a deeper level. This is the level. I've got it here for you. Oops. Oh my goodness, sorry. Okay, so this is what we see. So let's look at our relationship lives and how we might be going about breaking patterns. Now, this is, we might be using dating apps. That's fine. We might have learned, I just have to try to pick better. I'm not picking the right ones. Or you might take dating advice from friends and family and they just say, oh, have you tried doing this? Have you tried smiling more? Have you tried whatever? Or maybe you've tried being someone else, like we discussed, self-improvement or just meeting more people. That's all the surface stuff you might have tried. Then there's another level underneath that. Maybe you're understanding attachment styles. Maybe you've really noticed your pattern. You notice who you're drawn to, all of that sort of stuff. You notice maybe you're a people pleaser or roles you've played in relationships. Maybe you're a rescuer. And maybe you're starting to recognize emotional unavailability when you see it, or the reverse of that. And what's underneath, and the place I like to work so that we can get liberation on the top, is to understand our schemas, our core beliefs, this thing that I called implicit recognition, so schema chemistry. We want to understand our internalized model of love and connection, and ultimately the love template encapsulates all those things. So we want to take all of this stuff that's been operating out of our unconscious awareness up the top so that we're a little bit more aware about what's going on. Any good men on apps? Yes, I believe there are good men on the apps. Yes, I think there are emotionally available men who use apps. Wouldn't that be good if there was an app called Mr. Emotionally Available and all the men on there were already screened? Even though you couldn't trust that, could you? Because what criteria would they be using? Look, I want to take a little bit of a moment to tell you about something I'm doing at the moment. It's a group that I started last year, beginning of last year. It's had a few iterations. And it's called the Love Wisely group. And everything I've talked about tonight is exactly what I teach within it. And it may be something, if you are ready, that you want to consider, particularly if you want to learn about this stuff in the context of other women who are also going through it. because sometimes we don't have to do everything alone, which is often what we're doing these days. So I want to take some time now just to tell you a little bit about it, and that my lovely admin assistant has put the page link where you can read all about it in the chat. So what is it? I love the name Love Wisely because that's exactly what I'm on about. We want to use all our wisdom that we already had, and we take away all the crap and any new wisdom to be able to choose better for ourselves. So what is it? This is one of the things I'm doing now, and I love it. I only offer this group twice a year. It's a 12-week online group coaching program. And then we meet 3 months later for a bonus catch up to see how everybody's going. So it's a closed group. You join it, you all start together, we go on a 3-month journey. Now it's online, it's all recorded for you to watch later if you miss a night. So let me just tell you what you actually receive, just to be really explicit. Live group sessions, which I said are all recorded. This time, in this iteration, I'll be building a self-study component. So that will mean that all the stuff about schema chemistry, all the stuff about schemas, stuff I've been talking about tonight will all be there for you in lessons. It'll be dropped weekly. And then you will have lifetime access to that library. It just means there's no limit on it. It's not like I say you've got 12 months to watch it or whatever. You can watch it for as long as I'm around or you're around or our technology is around. There's also obviously there's workbooks and reflection guides, and there's meditations. I'm a big believer in healing meditations and mindset meditations. And there's also a Facebook community. And as well, there are some added extras in there. So there's a mini course called Healing Your Inner Child, which is all about trying to get to the core of the abandonment schema and do some deeper healing work for ourselves. And in that course, I talk a lot about reparenting, how we can learn to reparent ourselves, which is really useful. And then there's also a lovely audio course and healing bundle called Elevate Your Worth, which is about trying to elevate how we feel about ourselves and our worthiness when we're approaching relationships. So what's the point of it all? The point of it all is it's really lovely to do in a group. It's not a big group. If by some chance I get a lot of people who really want to do this work, then I'll split into 2 groups. But for now, it's only been one group once a week. So you would have an intimate forum. So what's the point? Because we want to start pattern breaking for good, okay? And we want to get to the root cause in a structured and really supportive way. I found that some of the women really valued knowing that they weren't alone. I'm all for bridging the gap between insight and how-tos, and that's what my intention is, to focus on it. I'm just going to tell you a couple of things about other people's experience. I'm not going to go forever with this. This is unusual but lovely. In the last group, September group, this is what Larissa said. Now, so nice, unexpected, but during the course of the 12-week group, she actually dated differently and decided to date a guy who she didn't have 10 out of 10 chemistry with, because she'd always found that led her to narcissists. And she actually met someone and started a relationship within that time. Obviously, early days, but all signs were good. So I'll just let you read that for yourself. Now, that's not necessarily the goal, of course. It's a 12-week program and then a 13th catch-up. But nevertheless, she was implementing some of these things that we were going through. And yeah, it was good. Taylor's experience, she'd previously come from this sort of choosing emotionally unavailable men for 11 years. And then she found the group particularly nurturing for her. Kylie's experience, she was a bit hesitant in the group, but then she found it was all very supportive. And as you can see, after a rough start to 2025, she went into the group and she basically learned a huge amount as someone who didn't know about schemas, and learn a huge amount about herself and how to approach things differently. So just going to let you know about the investment of the group. Now, there are different payment plans that I've installed. Just being really upfront, there is absolutely no pressure from me whether you opt to join the group with me this time or not. That is the full cost, 2,549, but I also have a payment plan of 3 months, and even now I've introduced a fourth one. If you're Australian, the GST is actually included in that, and it's all in Australian dollars. So if you would like to find out more, that's the web address, drgemmagladstone.com/lovewisely_group. And it's also in the chat. This is important. I want to let you know that a little bit about joining. So a little bit about joining is that the enrollment's open tonight. There's a limited time for you to enroll because I just want to encourage people to make a decision, and questions are welcome. If you're thinking about this but are not sure, send me an email. So enrollments will close the 8th of April midnight. And like I said, I want to keep it intimate, so the places will be absolutely limited. If you join up, you will receive a complimentary coaching session with me at the beginning or the first couple of weeks of the session, just so that we can get into it and look at what your goals are and give you a bit of encouragement going forwards. You might be wondering when it is. It's starting the 16th, a Thursday night, for 12 weeks. If you miss something, it's all recorded. You get lifetime access to the lessons. Do I need to be a certain age? No. Usually I don't get women in their early 20s, but I've had some people interested who might be around that 25 age and upwards. There's no, because it's the patterns that are the same. And it's actually lovely to have a few different women of different stages of life. Do I need to be dating? Absolutely not. You do not need to be dating. Do you need to know your schemas? No. What if I'm avoiding relationships? It doesn't matter, because it's very much focused on you. So I just want to let you know that enrollments are open for a week. That's just because I would like to encourage people to just make up their mind so that I can focus on planning the group and getting started on the 16th. Now, really importantly, if you have questions for me, by all means, email me, because I want to make really something clear for you. If you're wondering, but you think, oh, I don't know if this is right for me, I don't want anybody to make impulsive decisions that are not right for them. I would like to help you figure out whether this is going to be good for you. It's not therapy, it's a coaching group. No one's going to be put on the spot. We're not going to delve deep into your childhood and do anything like that. And it's a lovely, warm group that I've found the last few times I've run it since the beginning of last year. So thank you very much for just showing up tonight. I think we still have, quite a lot of people who have stayed. I appreciate you taking the time out. I know we've gone a bit over time, but I would like to answer any questions you've got, either about the program or about something else. If you would like to, if you have to leave now, that's fine. It's great that you've put in the effort. I hope you have taken something out of today. And if Love Wisely is what you've been thinking about, or you think, God, that is me, then, and I'd love to have you join me. Do we have any other questions? We've got lots of comments. Yeah, a lot of you are fresh out of relationships that have been very difficult. My question is, what are we activating in them? Is it simply narcissistic supply? Look, it is often got to do with narcissistic supply, meaning that they feel empowered by perhaps controlling or manipulating somebody, or telling somebody what to do, or feeling better because they've tested your boundaries and they've realized that you'll put up with a little bit more maybe. But sadly, they don't get their needs met either. Ultimately, they miss out as well because they're never being authentic. They're never going to find true intimacy. So that's also triggering for them. Does that mean that a partner can't heal us, or that, we can have healing relationships? for sure. And relationships don't have to be perfect. We can have a good relationship with someone who does maybe trigger us sometimes. But the key is, are both people willing and able and insightful? And do both people take responsibility for their role in things? And are they open? And often, many people are not because they've got too many of their own defenses. Okay. How can I know I'm ready for attracting a healthy relationship? Is the membership you speak of on Spotify? No, my podcast is on Spotify. I also have a podcast called Healing for Love. The membership that I talk about here, this is a group coaching program where we get in and hit the ground running. But we meet you where you're at. There's no expectation, right? You'll be at different levels and so forth. It's a very supportive and nurturing experience. Am I ready to attract a healthy relationship? I'm a great believer in not putting your life on hold before you experiment with things. I think getting out there and dating without expectation and experimenting to learn how you are, what comes up for you, what do you notice in other people, how you feel in people's presence is a good thing to do at any stage. But certainly the more self-awareness we have around our schemas and our patterns and how we show up is fundamental. And I think if there's a single most effective thing we can do to break and understand ourselves is to understand our schemas and particularly the role of the abandonment schema and our abandoned part of self. It's really important and underlies a lot of activation in relationships. Okay, how do you respond when you're meeting with someone who maybe you don't have 10 out of 10 chemistry with, and then they say they don't have fireworks? So they're getting hijacked by the schema chemistry and they feel that they have a lack of it. There's not much we can do about the other person, I'm afraid. But I hear you, that is frustrating. You're saying you don't have 10 out of 10 with them, but they're saying they don't feel the fireworks. They're not giving you a chance. They're not giving the connection a chance. They might have deeper problems with connecting. Yeah, it's not nice to be on the receiving end of that, but that's what people are going to say that for sure because, and often men, if they don't have a 10 out of 10 chemistry, they feel like, oh, I'm not going to pursue this one. But the issue is focusing on our chemistry and our schema chemistry, and we can't, unfortunately, do much about that. Slow connections with people are the best, getting to know people slowly. Dating is hard. It's hard in general. I think it's hard for everybody and most people. It's particularly hard if we have those kinds of early core schemas. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm so glad you stayed to the end. Any other final question? Does rewriting the schema heal the wound? Yes. Look, we can work to heal our core wounds, say abandonment. Abandonment is the deepest, biggest wound probably that there is because it's the oldest. And I talk about the abandoned child. That's why I've got that mini course in there to look at how can we reparent ourselves. We can heal that many ways. You might have had therapeutic intervention to heal that. We can heal that by doing our own inner reparenting work. We can heal that by acting in our healthy adult mode and getting out of things. And we would come across someone very depriving, we can heal that by ending it soon and not perpetuating the pattern. So we can heal our schemas in a number of different ways. And it's all part of it, right? All of these things that I've discussed make inroad into healing our schemas. And everybody is very different. You have to figure out what you need. What does it mean when someone finds the one straight after breaking up with you? Look, I suppose that can happen. Probably talking about you've been with someone for ages and then they haven't been committal, they've broken it off and then they think they've met the one. Have they met the one or have they just met someone else who's got an emotional deprivation schema and they have chemistry with and that partner is not asking for what they want? We don't know. It doesn't mean anything more than what's happened. They've broken up and they're very avoidant people mean that they're emotionally avoidant. They're avoidant of their inner world. They've learnt to be on their own. They've learnt to compartmentalize. They still have needs. They still want to be in a relationship, but they just don't know how to connect, right? I once had a male client who was really avoidant. I saw him for a while. And the first thing he said to me was, I don't know how to love or receive love, give love or receive love. Now, this guy was a lovely guy, didn't have any problem finding women and had all sorts of schemes going on, very emotionally deprived, defective. Wanted the connection, but just did not know how to be intimate emotionally. And so just because somebody's gone off and finds the one doesn't mean anything about you, and it doesn't mean anything about the quality of their relationship either. We don't know. Okay. Unless there's any others, this is probably all we've got time for tonight. I know I've gone on a bit. I tend to do that. Thank you so much. A lot to think about. Great. I'm glad I've given you a lot to think about. And prioritize yourself. Take some time to take all this stuff in. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining me, and I sincerely hope this has been really helpful. If you do want to continue working with me and you're thinking Love Wisely might be for you, but you're not sure, just send me an email and I'll be happy to talk it through. I want the right thing for you, what's going to be a great match. Thanks, everybody, and I will leave it there. Stay in touch. Let me know how you get on. Take care, everyone. Good night.